She was the kind of person everyone admired from a distance. In the tall glass building where she worked, people whispered her title with respect. She was powerful, successful, and always in control. Her presence alone could silence a crowded room. To the outside world, she seemed to have everything: wealth, authority, and a life many dreamed of. But what no one saw was the silence that followed her when she left the office each night. Behind the polished heels, the designer clothes, and the firm voice in meetings, she carried a heart that had been broken long ago. The kind of heartbreak that doesn't show on the surface, but eats away quietly, day by day. She used to believe in love once. Years ago, she dreamed of building a life filled with laughter and companionship. But life did not go as planned. People she trusted betrayed her, and the ones she loved most walked away when she needed them. Little by little, she began to lock away her feelings, convincing herself that love was nothing more than an illusion. Work became her escape. She poured every ounce of her energy into climbing the ladder, shutting her heart from anything that might make her feel vulnerable again. She taught herself not to cry, not to hope, and not to expect kindness from anyone. With time, she became known as the CEO who had no time for emotions, efficient, sharp, and untouchable. In meetings, her words were always precise. She never let her guard down, never let anyone see past her professional mask. And because of that, no one tried to get close to her. People respected her, yes. But respect is not the same as warmth. Behind her office door, she often sat alone with files spread out in front of her, working long after everyone had gone home. When she looked out of the giant glass windows at night, the city lights sparkled like tiny stars below. They made her wonder what everyone else was doing at that very moment. Maybe some were laughing around dinner tables. Maybe others were sharing a quiet evening with someone they loved. She had the money, the power, the office that touched the sky, but not a single voice waiting for her when she went home. Loneliness is strange. You can sit in a room full of people and still feel it. That's what her life had become: meetings, calls, emails, endless achievements that felt empty once the applause faded. She told herself this was the price of success, that she didn't need love, she didn't need comfort. She only needed to keep moving forward. But deep down, in the quiet hours of the night, she knew her heart was tired of being so cold. Sometimes she remembered small things from the past, like the sound of someone laughing beside her, or the warmth of a hug she hadn't felt in years. These memories came like shadows, uninvited, but they reminded her that once upon a time, she wasn't always like this. She wasn't always so hard. Yet, whenever that softness tried to return, she pushed it away. Feelings make you weak, she told herself, and weakness has no place in my world. So she built her walls higher, made her voice stronger, and walked with confidence, even when her heart felt heavy. Her employees often wondered what her life was like outside the office. Did she have family? Did she have close friends? They couldn't imagine her as anything other than the perfect, composed leader. No one dared to ask, and she never offered. She had mastered the art of hiding behind success. But what she didn't realize was that no matter how strong those walls were, the human heart has its own way of searching for light. Deep down, she still longed for something real, someone who could look past her achievements and see the person she was underneath. Someone who could remind her that her heart was still alive, even if she had buried it for years. For now, though, she lived her life like a machine. Early mornings, long hours, endless reports. She kept herself busy so she wouldn't have time to think. The truth was simple. If she slowed down even for a moment, she might have to face the emptiness inside. And that was something she wasn't ready to do. What she didn't know was that life had already begun setting things in motion. In another part of the city, a man was fighting his own battles, carrying his own burdens, yet holding on to hope because of the little girl who depended on him. Their paths hadn't crossed yet, but soon, very soon, destiny would bring them face to face. And everything she believed about love, healing, and trust was going to change. He woke up each morning before the sun rose. The alarm clock rang, and though his body was tired, he forced himself up because he had no other choice. Life had not been kind to him, but he refused to give up, not when a pair of small hands tugged at his sleeve every morning, reminding him why he had to keep going. He was a single father. Years ago, he thought his life was complete. He had a partner, a home filled with laughter, and dreams of a future where his family would always stay together. But fate had taken a turn he never expected. The woman he once loved was no longer there, and suddenly, the weight of raising their daughter fell entirely on his shoulders. At first, it felt impossible. How could one man fill the role of two parents? How could he provide comfort, stability, and love while also keeping food on the table and paying the bills? There were nights he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking himself if he was enough. But then he would hear the soft breathing of his daughter in the next room, and his heart would steady. She was his reason. She was his strength. His little girl had a smile that could melt away the heaviest of burdens. Even when he returned home after long hours of work, covered in sweat and exhaustion, one giggle from her was enough to remind him why he kept fighting. To her, he wasn't just a father. He was her whole world. The apartment they lived in was small, but he did everything he could to make it feel warm. He patched up old furniture, fixed squeaky doors, and painted the walls with cheerful colors, not because he had the money to redecorate, but because he wanted his daughter to feel safe and loved. He often skipped buying things for himself just so he could surprise her with a small toy or her favorite snack after payday. Balancing work and fatherhood wasn't easy. He worked multiple jobs at times, fixing things here and there, picking up shifts that others didn't want. His hands were rough, his back often ached, but he never complained. Sacrifice had become his second nature. Whenever his daughter looked at him with those innocent eyes and said, "Daddy, I love you," he felt like the richest man in the world. Still, the weight of loneliness sometimes crept into his life too. He missed having someone to share his struggles with, someone who could tell him, "You're doing great," when the burden grew heavy. But unlike the CEO, he didn't let the pain harden him. Instead, he carried it quietly, hiding it behind his gentle smile. He had promised himself that his daughter would never feel the emptiness he sometimes felt inside. Every evening, after finishing his work, he made sure to spend time with her. They would sit together and read storybooks, draw silly pictures, or share simple meals that tasted better just because they were together. She often asked about her mother, and though his heart broke every time, he always answered softly, assuring her that her mother loved her from afar. He didn't want his daughter to carry sorrow. He wanted her to carry hope. There were days when he struggled with money, when bills piled up and rent deadlines made him anxious. But even then, he refused to let his daughter see his fear. Instead, he turned challenges into lessons. "We can fix anything," he often told her when something broke around the house. Whether it was a leaking faucet, a broken chair, or even a scraped knee, he repeated the same words, "We can fix it." Those words became her belief. To the little girl, her father wasn't just a provider. He was a hero. She believed he could mend anything, even things that couldn't be seen. Their bond was unshakable. While many people in the world chased after wealth, fame, or success, this father only chased one thing: the happiness of his child. Her laughter was his treasure. Her trust was his strength. And though his life was filled with hardships, he wouldn't trade it for anything. Sometimes, as he tucked her into bed, he thought about what kind of future awaited them. Would she grow up strong and brave, like her mother once was? Would he be able to give her the opportunities she deserved? The questions haunted him, but every night before sleep, he whispered the same promise: "As long as I'm here, you'll never be alone." Little did he know, his daughter carried those words deep in her heart. She didn't see him as tired, overworked, or struggling. She only saw a man who loved her more than anything in the world. To her, he was proof that even in the hardest of times, love could shine the brightest. And it was this little girl, her innocent faith, her gentle spirit, that was about to touch the life of someone far different from them. A woman who lived in glass towers and surrounded herself with silence. Their worlds couldn't have been more opposite, yet destiny was preparing to tie them together. Soon, the man who fixed broken chairs and leaky faucets would be asked to fix something far more fragile: a heart that had been cold for far too long. And it wouldn't be his tools or his strength that made it possible. It would be the pure, innocent words of his daughter. It was an ordinary morning in the city. The glass towers reflected the sunlight, and the streets buzzed with people rushing to work, coffee in hand, eyes glued to their phones. Inside one of those towers, the CEO's office was already alive with the sound of tapping keyboards and ringing phones. Meetings were lined up, schedules were tight, and as usual, she walked through the hallway with a calm but distant expression, her presence commanding silent respect. But life, in its quiet way, had started preparing something she couldn't see coming. That same morning, the single father packed his daughter's small bag with crayons, a notebook, and her favorite toy. Normally, he tried to leave her with a neighbor while he worked. But today was different. His second job required him to be at a corporate building, fixing a maintenance issue. The neighbor wasn't available, and he couldn't afford to miss the job. With no other option, he brought his daughter along, quietly praying she would stay close to him and not cause any trouble. She was thrilled, though. To her, following her father to work wasn't a burden. It was an adventure. She skipped happily beside him, clutching his hand tightly as they walked through the busy lobby of the tall building. Everything looked big and shiny to her eyes, the marble floors, the glass walls, the endless elevators going up and down. The CEO's building wasn't the kind of place children usually visited. Suits and polished shoes filled the space, not crayons and toys. People passing by glanced curiously at the little girl, but her father simply smiled and guided her to a quiet corner near the worksite, where she could sit and draw while he fixed what he was hired to repair. It wasn't long before she noticed the woman. The CEO walked by with her usual air of control, her high heels clicking against the floor, her eyes focused straight ahead. The little girl didn't know who she was, didn't understand the weight of her title, or the fear her employees felt around her. She only saw someone who looked sad. Children notice things adults often miss. The little girl tilted her head, watching the woman's face as she passed by. There was something about her eyes, sharp, yes, but also tired. They reminded her of her father on nights when he thought she was asleep, staring into the distance, as if the weight of the world sat on his shoulders. The CEO didn't pay attention at first. To her, it was just another day, another task, another endless cycle of work. But as she passed the corner where the little girl sat with her crayons, she felt those innocent eyes on her. For a split second, their gazes met. And in that brief moment, something stirred inside her, though she quickly brushed it off and walked on. The father, meanwhile, kept his head down, focused on the job. He wasn't the type to chase conversations or draw attention. His only concern was finishing the work well and making sure his daughter was safe. He didn't even realize that her quiet presence was already beginning to bridge two very different worlds. During lunch, as workers hurried to grab food or make calls, the little girl kept drawing. She drew pictures of houses, flowers, and sometimes of her father fixing things. But when the CEO passed by again, she suddenly picked up her paper and crayons and sketched something new, a tall figure standing alone in front of a big window, with stars shining outside. It was her impression of the woman she had just seen. When her father returned to check on her, she held up the picture and said, "Daddy, look. She looks like she needs a friend." He glanced at it briefly, smiled at his daughter's imagination, and went back to his work. But what he didn't know was that his little girl's heart had already reached out in a way he couldn't see yet. Later in the afternoon, the CEO found herself pausing as she walked past again. She noticed the little girl's crayons scattered on the floor and the picture lying beside her. Normally, she wouldn't care. Normally, she would keep walking, untouched by anything outside her professional world. But this time, curiosity made her slow down. She bent slightly, picked up the paper, and for the first time in years, she felt her heart skip. The drawing was simple, childlike, yet it spoke volumes. It showed loneliness, but also light. It was her, standing by the window. How could a child she had never spoken to see something so deeply hidden within her? The little girl smiled up at her, completely unafraid of the powerful woman everyone else treated with distance. "That's you," she said softly. "But I can draw you with a smile next time." The CEO didn't know what to say. She froze, the paper still in her hand. People rarely spoke to her in such an honest, gentle way, especially not children. She managed a small nod, returned the paper, and walked away quickly, her heart beating faster than it had in a long time. It was such a small moment, almost invisible in the grand flow of the day. Yet for both the CEO and the little girl, it was the beginning of something neither of them understood yet. The father, still busy with his work, had no idea of the quiet exchange that had just taken place. To him, it was just another job, another day. But destiny had begun weaving threads between their lives, threads that would only grow stronger with time. And so, in the heart of a tall, cold building where loneliness lived in glass offices, a little girl's innocence had just cracked open a door that might lead to something far bigger than any of them could imagine. The next day came like any other. The city rushed forward in its usual rhythm, cars honking, phones buzzing, people chasing time. Inside the tall building, the CEO began her morning the same way she always did. Coffee on her desk, her assistant handing her files, and a calendar packed with back-to-back meetings. Everything in her life was tightly controlled, carefully planned. And yet, despite her usual calm mask, something from the day before lingered in her thoughts. She remembered the drawing, a child's simple sketch that had somehow seen through her in a way no one else ever dared. She had looked at that picture more than once in her office, trying to shake off the strange feeling it gave her. Why did it matter? Why had a little girl's innocent eyes unsettled her so much? She didn't have an answer, but her heart carried the weight of it as she walked through the halls once again. Downstairs, the single father had returned with his daughter. The maintenance job had stretched into another day, and once again, he had no choice but to bring her along. He settled her in a quiet corner with her crayons, kissed her forehead gently, and reminded her to stay close. She nodded happily, already pulling out a fresh piece of paper to draw. It wasn't long before the little girl saw the familiar woman again. The same tall figure in sharp clothes, the same eyes that looked strong on the outside but tired underneath. Most people avoided the CEO, lowering their gaze or stepping out of her way. But the little girl didn't move. She just watched her quietly, her head tilted with innocent curiosity. And then, without hesitation, she stood up and walked toward her. The CEO stopped in her tracks, surprised to see the child approaching. No one ever approached her like this. People always waited for her permission, her signal. But here was this small girl, looking up at her, without fear, her crayons still in her hand. The little girl's voice was soft, but it carried a weight the CEO hadn't felt in years. "You look sad," she said simply. The words pierced straight through her. No one had ever dared say that to her, not colleagues, not business partners, not even acquaintances. Everyone assumed she was untouchable, too strong to feel something as fragile as sadness. Yet here was a child, stating it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The CEO tried to brush it off. "I'm not sad," she replied quickly, her voice colder than she intended. She wanted to walk away, to escape the strange vulnerability this little girl stirred in her. But the child didn't move. She just looked at her with those clear, innocent eyes that saw through walls and masks. Then she spoke again, her tiny voice carrying more truth than any adult's ever could. "My daddy says hearts can be fixed. You just need someone who cares." The CEO froze. Her chest tightened. Her throat went dry. For years, she had convinced herself her heart was beyond repair, that love and kindness were things meant for other people, not for her. And yet, in one simple sentence, this child had undone years of armor. She opened her mouth to respond, but found no words. What could she say? How could she explain the walls she had built, the betrayals she had endured, the loneliness she had hidden behind her success? She couldn't. Instead, she just stood there, silent, her carefully polished composure cracking for the first time in a long time. The father, noticing his daughter's absence from her corner, quickly rushed over. He saw her standing in front of the CEO and felt panic rise in his chest. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly, reaching for his daughter's hand. "She didn't mean to bother you. I'll make sure she doesn't disturb anyone." But before he could lead her away, the CEO spoke softly, so softly that even she was surprised by her own voice. She wasn't disturbing me. The father paused, unsure how to respond. He had never heard the CEO speak like that before. There was no edge in her tone, no command, just something human. The little girl squeezed her father's hand and smiled up at the woman. "It's true, you know. Daddy fixes everything. He can fix broken chairs, broken doors, and broken hearts too." Her father's face turned red with embarrassment. He quickly tried to hush her, but the CEO didn't seem annoyed. For the first time in years, she actually felt something different, something warm flickering beneath the coldness she had carried for so long. She looked at the man standing awkwardly in front of her, then back at the girl, and realized the child truly believed every word she said. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to believe it too. The moment ended quickly, as moments like this often do. The father gently led his daughter back to her spot, whispering for her to behave, while the CEO walked away slowly, her thoughts heavier than before. But inside, something had shifted. The little girl's words echoed in her mind, refusing to leave. "My daddy says hearts can be fixed. You just need someone who cares." She carried those words into her office, into her meetings, into the long evening hours when she was alone again. For the first time in years, the silence around her didn't feel the same. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was filled with the sound of a small, innocent voice, reminding her of something she had almost forgotten, that her heart was still alive. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. A single sentence from a little girl had opened a door inside her that she thought was sealed forever. The days passed, but the CEO couldn't push the little girl's words out of her mind. In boardrooms filled with serious faces and heavy conversations, she sometimes caught herself thinking about that soft voice saying, "My daddy says hearts can be fixed." It was strange, even unsettling, how a child's innocent words could stay with her more than all the important discussions about money, contracts, and power. At night, when the office was quiet and the city lights glowed outside her tall windows, she replayed the moment in her mind. The way the girl had looked at her, not with fear, not with respect, not with judgment, but with pure kindness. That look had pierced through her carefully built armor, and for the first time in years, she felt cracks in the walls she had worked so hard to maintain. She didn't realize it yet, but she had begun to look for them. Each morning, when she walked through the lobby, her eyes unconsciously searched for that small figure with crayons and papers scattered around. And when she did catch sight of the girl, something in her chest softened. She still kept her distance, still carried her cold expression, but inside, something was quietly changing. The father noticed too. At first, he was cautious. He never wanted his daughter to disturb people, especially someone like the CEO, who clearly had no time for small talk. But to his surprise, the woman never reacted harshly. In fact, sometimes she slowed down when passing by, her eyes lingering for just a moment on the little girl's drawings. It was such a small thing, but to him it was unexpected. One afternoon, while he was repairing something in a hallway near her office, his daughter proudly showed the CEO another picture. This time, it wasn't of a lonely figure by the window. It was a picture of 3 people holding hands, a man, a child, and a woman with long hair. The CEO stared at it, feeling something stir deep inside her. The child grinned up at her and said, "See? This one's you. You don't look sad anymore." The woman didn't know how to respond. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, caught between emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. For a long moment, she just stood there, holding the paper, before finally whispering, "Thank you." Those 2 words were simple, but for her, they carried weight. She didn't thank people often, and she certainly didn't thank children. Yet somehow, it felt right. Her assistant noticed the subtle changes in her too. The CEO, who had always been so sharp and impatient, began showing small glimpses of softness. A faint smile here, a pause before speaking there. Nothing dramatic, nothing the outside world would notice. But for those close to her, it was enough to realize that something was different. As days turned into weeks, she found herself watching the father as well. He was nothing like the people she was surrounded by in her world. There was no arrogance in his walk, no hunger for power in his eyes. He worked quietly, his hands steady, his focus sharp. And yet, beneath his tired expression, there was a gentleness, a patience she hadn't seen in anyone for years. Sometimes, she caught him looking at his daughter with such tenderness that it startled her. She was used to seeing people look at her with fear, admiration, or envy, but never with love as pure as that. It made her wonder what it would feel like to be looked at that way, even just once. Her curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. She wanted to know more about them, about the man who worked tirelessly and the child who spoke with such wisdom. And though she didn't admit it to herself, she found excuses to walk through the same hallways, to pass by their corner more often than necessary. The little girl, in her innocent way, continued to reach out. Sometimes she would offer the CEO a drawing, sometimes just a smile, and sometimes a few words that seemed to touch her more deeply than any grand speech ever could. "You should laugh more," the girl once said. "It makes people feel warm." The CEO didn't laugh often, but that day, for the first time in years, she did. Just a small one, but enough to surprise even herself. The father noticed these changes too. Though he didn't say much, he could see the effect his daughter had on the powerful woman. He saw the way the CEO's eyes softened whenever the little girl spoke, the way her steps slowed, the way her face looked less heavy than before. He didn't know why his daughter had chosen to reach out to this woman of all people, but he trusted her instincts. Children often see what adults overlook. Slowly, a fragile connection began to grow. It wasn't built through big gestures or long conversations, but through small moments, shared glances, gentle words, and the innocent faith of a child. The CEO still lived her life surrounded by glass walls, still worked long hours, and carried herself with pride. But now, in the quiet moments, she felt less alone. When she looked out of her window at the city lights, she no longer saw just cold stars. She remembered the little girl's smile, her drawings, and her words about hearts being fixed. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if it was true? What if hearts could be mended, not by power or control, but by something as simple as kindness? She didn't have the answer yet, but she knew one thing. The cracks in her walls were growing, and through them, light was beginning to seep in. Time has a way of softening even the hardest edges when kindness keeps returning. What began as small, almost unnoticeable moments had quietly grown into something bigger. The CEO, who once walked through her building like an untouchable statue, had begun to slow her steps, to meet eyes instead of avoiding them, to carry less of the heavy silence she once wore like armor. She didn't change overnight. No, her heart resisted at first. Years of hurt don't disappear so easily. But every time she saw the little girl, every time she heard her soft laughter or received one of her drawings, something inside her shifted. It was as if the girl's innocence had reached into the parts of her she thought were long gone and whispered, "You're still human. You can still feel." The father noticed these changes more than anyone. He had grown used to seeing the CEO as distant, unreachable, someone from another world entirely. But now, when she walked past, there was warmth where there used to be coldness. Sometimes she stopped to ask his daughter about her latest drawing. Sometimes she even nodded at him, a small gesture that felt surprisingly genuine. One afternoon, after his work shift ended, he was surprised when the CEO lingered nearby. She cleared her throat, almost as if the words were difficult to push out, and said, "Your daughter, she's remarkable." He smiled softly, his tired eyes lighting up in the way they always did when he spoke of her. "She's my strength," he replied. "Everything I do is for her." The CEO nodded, her gaze falling on the little girl who was humming to herself while coloring a picture. For a long moment, she said nothing more. But her silence carried a weight that made the father realize she wasn't just speaking about the child. She was thinking about herself, about the life she had lived without such warmth. From then on, small conversations began to bloom. Nothing too personal at first, just simple exchanges about the weather, the child's drawings, or the repair work being done in the building. But beneath those small talks, something deeper stirred. She found herself curious about him. The way he carried himself with quiet dignity despite his struggles, the way he always put his daughter first, the way love seemed to follow him like a shadow even when life gave him little in return. And he, too, began to see her differently. Beyond the sharp suits and the commanding presence, he noticed glimpses of a woman who had once longed for love but had hidden it away. A woman who, despite her success, looked at his daughter as though she was rediscovering something precious she thought was lost forever. The little girl, of course, noticed everything. Children always do. One evening, after they returned home, she tugged on her father's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, she's not sad anymore. You helped fix her." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, sweetheart. If she's healing, it's because of you." But the truth was, it wasn't just a child, it was both of them. The girl's innocence had cracked open the walls, but it was the father's quiet strength that gave the CEO a reason to keep those walls down. As weeks turned into months, the bond grew stronger. The CEO found herself smiling more, not forced, not for appearances, but real smiles that reach your eyes. She found herself looking forward to the days when she might catch sight of the father and daughter. Her office, once filled only with silence, now had little gifts pinned to the side of her desk, simple crayon drawings the little girl had given her, treasures she never thought she'd value so deeply. One evening, after a long day, the CEO stepped outside her building and found the father waiting for his daughter to finish tying her shoelaces. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the simple scene, a father bending down to help, a child giggling, the air filled with warmth. It was such an ordinary sight, yet to her, it felt extraordinary. She realized then that love doesn't always come in grand gestures or perfect stories. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a man who carries the weight of the world but still finds time to laugh with his child. Sometimes it comes through a little girl who believes that even broken hearts can be fixed. The father looked up, catching her gaze, and for a moment, the world felt still. He didn't have the riches she was surrounded by. He didn't have the power she wielded. But he had something far more valuable. He had love, the kind that heals without asking for anything in return. And slowly, she allowed herself to step closer to it. It wasn't about titles anymore. It wasn't about wealth or struggles. It was about three people who had found each other in the unlikeliest of places. A man who had learned to survive through love, a woman who had forgotten what love felt like, and a child who believed that love could fix everything. Their lives didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still challenges, still fears, still scars from the past. But now they faced them differently, together. The CEO, once cold and unreachable, discovered laughter again. The single father, once weighed down by loneliness, found comfort in knowing he wasn't alone. And the little girl, whose innocent words had started it all, saw her belief come true. Hearts really could be fixed. Love hadn't arrived with fireworks or fairy tales. It had arrived in the simplest way, a small voice, a gentle presence, a quiet bond that grew stronger with time. And, in the end, that was enough.